Forge gang. I am still a hard man. Let's go. All right, how are you all doing this evening? Yeah, I hope you're all doing very well this evening. I just want to listen to some really based Alexander Dugin and Noam Chomsky takes. You know, some really based Noam Chomsky and really based Alexander Dugin stuff, because that stuff is freaking awesome. Alexander Dugin and like Noam Chomsky are very smart, very high IQ, very intellectual, and very brilliant people. But yeah, Forge gang. I am still a hard man. Let's go. Yeah, just listening to some Alexander Dugin. Let's see here. Oh, by the way, I have been called a fascist.
The global world can only be ruled by the laws of
I listen to Alexander Dugin. How nice. How nice.
economics
Awesome.
and the universal morality of human rights. All political decisions are replaced by technical ones.
Yeah, there is no universal morality of human rights. There is no privileged or unprivileged people. There are those that are capable of survival of the fittest, and those that can't. It's that simple. There are those that are capable of survival of the fittest and those that aren't.
Machinery and technology substitute for all else. The French philosopher Alain de Benoist terms this law governance or micromanagement. Managers and technocrats take the place of the politician who makes historical decisions, optimizing the logistics of management. Masses of people are equated to a mass of identical objects. For this reason, post-liberal reality, or rather, virtuality increasingly displacing reality from itself, leads straight to the complete abolition of politics. Some may argue that the liberals lie to us when they speak of the end of ideology. This was my debate with the philosopher Alexander Zinoviev. In reality, they remain believers in their ideology and simply deny all others the right to exist. This is not exactly true. When liberalism transforms from being an ideological arrangement to the only content of our extant social and technological existence, then it is no longer an ideology, but an existential fact, an objective order of things. It also causes any attempt to challenge its supremacy as being not only difficult, but also foolish. In the postmodern era, liberalism moves from the sphere of the subject to the sphere of the object. Potentially, this will lead to the complete replacement of reality by virtuality. The fourth political theory is conceived as an alternative to post-liberalism, but not as one ideological arrangement in relation to another. Instead, it is as an incorporeal idea opposed to corporeal matter, as a possibility entering into conflict with the actuality, as that which is yet to come into being attacking that which is already in existence. At the same time, the fourth political theory cannot be the continuation of either the second political theory or the third. The end of fascism, much like the end of communism, was not just an accidental misunderstanding, but the expression of a rather lucid historical logic. They challenged the spirit of modernity. Fascism did so almost openly, Communism more covertly. See the review of the Soviet period as a special, eschatological version of the traditional society by Mikhail S. Agursky or Sergei Kara-Murza and Lost. This means that the struggle with the postmodern metamorphosis of liberalism into the form of postmodernity and globalization should be qualitatively different. It must be based on new principles and propose new strategies. Nevertheless, the starting point of this ideology is precisely the rejection of the very essence of postmodernity. This starting point is possible but neither guaranteed, nor ordained by fate because it arises from
All
man's
right,
free
I'm
will
back.
and his spirit, rather than an impersonal historical process.
Yeah, I do apologize. I had to go downstairs for a second. Something had my attention. I should say that something urgently required my attention downstairs. So I'm back. How are you doing, Interdimensional Lizard? Interdimensional Lizard says, let's go indeed. Yeah. We are the true ones. The true mofos. You know, really, Charles Darwin had some good ideas. I'm not going to say he was entirely right about his ontology of man, the ontology of man's existence. The thing is that you can believe in genetic biology and biological realism, and not biological determinism, but biological realism, and still believe that there is a higher ontological purpose for man's place in existence. That is very much a possibility. Christianity has done many things for the West. Christianity was among the biggest factors of what defined the West and set it apart from the rest of other civilizations that were not defined by Christianity, as Western Europe and its offshoots were ultimately. So that much is true. Anyways, I gotta get a new battery for my laptop. It takes a while to get the process and all of that through. That's what happens when you have like these empty, dead, nihilistic companies like Amazon, Nihilizon. You know, people call it Amazon, I call it Nihilizon, or Nihilonzon. At least that's what I think Amazon should be called, is Nihilonzon, because it's nihilist. And the modern world just breeds this disgusting air of nihilism or nihilism. It's just deplorable. It's just absolutely deplorable. I just gotta say, it's just deplorable. I don't even know if anybody is alive right now besides just me. I don't believe nobody else is live. I can check on my phone right fast. Yeah, I need to copy the link and post it in the Discord as well. Okay. Is there anybody else live right now? Let's take a look and find out. Butcher's Crossing, Chapter 7. Why Progressives Fear the Rise of Traditionalism. Well, that's a good one. Yeah, I think that the West has kind of lost its meaning. some of its former substantive meaning of what it used to be. Americans have just lost their sense of selves. They want to aspire to be fictional characters like Marvel and DC and Hollywood characters and not just be themselves. And like people want to live by an ideal, an existential ideal that is unrealistic, unattainable. They want to become something that otherwise they would know, they would have the better sense of knowing that they can't strive to become that. At least not until you do the work and the diligence to achieve it. If you are diligent and patient and you do the work and strive very hard to achieve it and to make the most of what you can do of yourself and push yourself beyond, then you can be that thing that you want to strive to be. Otherwise, you'll never achieve it. It's an impossible goal to achieve such a thing. Dedimus Sumidid says, a simulation of a marital act is indeed not the marital act. Yeah, well, I just put that title there to piss people off, Dedimus. I just put that there as the title to kind of just, piss the libs off, piss on the libs, so to speak. But yeah, I think that consensual sex is only between a man and a woman. And yeah, a man and a woman can have illegitimate sex. I didn't say, Dedimus, that I didn't mean to say that like sex between a man and a woman out of marriage is a good thing or is a legitimate act. I didn't mean to say that. I'm just saying that these people like to virtue signal so hard, and it's just like, I just don't want to hear it. Sex is between a man and a woman. It's that simple. It is actually really that straightforward. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that in order to breed babies, it has to be between a man and a woman. Sodomites BTFO'd, yes. Absolutely. Forge Gang! Let's go! Oh, Eric, I heard that you got kicked out of, what was his name again? Cog's chat. I heard that you embarrassed yourself and made a fool of yourself in Cog's chat and you got banned a few months ago. I found out about that. John has never had consensual sex before. And you would be the go-to specialist for that. That's just kind of a one-trick pony it's such a catch-22 that you're making there. That's a catch-22. No, I heard from a credible source that you were banned from Cog's chat. But okay, Eric. You want to use that catch-22? What? Okay, then. Dedimus Sumidid says, a marital act is just a euphemism for sex. I fully agree with your title. Yeah, I don't... The entire purpose of biological sex is to procreate. That's all it ever was for to begin with. Okay, was a man and a woman makes a baby. The woman is impregnated by the sperm. Her eggs are fertilized and it makes a baby. It makes a fetus. And in 9 months, if everything goes to plan, she produces offspring. That is the only purpose that sex has ever been for. Okay, from a biological standpoint, that is what sex has always been about. And we got one-liners Eric Drunk Chump over here with his little catch-22s that he's dropping. He thinks he's dropping truth bombs at me, but in fact, they're just catch-22s. We have Eric Duchamp, and he's out here. He's dropping his catch-22s, thinking they're truth bombs or something. Let's see here. Eric Drunk Chump says that he is not banned. Okay, well, I heard from a credible source that Cog banned you in his chat. Maybe you're now unbanned, but I heard that you were banned 5 or 4 months ago. Eric Drunk Chump says, a credible source who? The voices inside your head? Oh, that's real funny. That's so funny, I forgot to laugh. That was so funny, I forgot to laugh. I left my laughing card downstairs. That was so funny, that was almost so funny, I actually forgot to laugh. Ha ha ha. Eric Drunk Chump says, just calling you retarded, John, has his tradition. Yeah, you would know a lot about tradition. Wouldn't you, Eric Drunk Chump? You would know a lot about how moral it is to say or make up or pull random shit out of your ass. You say that it's very moral of you to harass Dee Dee and say that you're going to stab Dee Dee in the eye and injure her eyeball and gouge out her eyeball. But, okay, if that's how you're going to operate, dude, I don't care. Just, understand the legal ramifications of what that's going to do, because that's going to have legal ramifications on you if you actually do that, which we all know that you're not, Eric, because you're a coward. You're a big little fat pussy bitch throwing these catch-22s thinking that, there's some kind of truth bombs. But anyways, yeah, I knew that I would take some heat for that, but if we're going to have, these trannies on X saying that men should not fap because they're engaging in moral supremacy too. They're engaging in a moral supremacy as well. They're saying that straight men should no fap. And I've seen it. I've seen these trannies. Men to women trannies that want to promote the no fap. And it's okay, well, if you can do that, then I can be a moral supremacist. I can say that only straight people should be able to have sex. Let's see how you feel about that. And I'm not going to listen to you. I owe you nothing, and I don't care what you have to say. But yeah, I think that Ted Kaczynski was right. Ted Kaczynski was correct. Alexander Dugin hit the ball on some things. He tends to fall short. But I don't give a shit because, you know what? It upsets people that I listen to Alexander Dugin, so I'm going to listen to some Alexander Dugin.
Elaine Soral. Why we should read Alexander Dugin. When the notions of right and left have become politically meaningless, in the West as much as elsewhere, everywhere inside the world, when liberals and libertarians agree on the essentials, when the three grand political theories of the 20th century, capitalism, communism, and fascism, have ultimately proven incapable of governing peoples peaceably, what is left to do? According to Alexander Dugin, a teacher of sociology and geopolitics at the renowned Lermonov University of Moscow, and one of the most influential intellectuals in Russia, only one radical solution remains: to devise a different approach, a fourth political theory. Conceptualizing and theorizing it, such is the aim of the present book. The thought of this brilliant Moscow intellectual, which transcends our Western ideological divides and media-conditioned reactions, will not fail to surprise conformists, for it suggests that in order for us to face the future in a resolute and victorious way, we must revert to traditional forms of spirituality. According to Dugin, the primary target must be Western postmodernism. We must wage war upon this phallosocratic empire, a morbid blend of the society of the spectacle and consumer culture, and its plan for ultimate world domination. In fourth political theory, Dugin shows that the only way to build a multipolar world founded on authentic values is to resolutely turn one's back on the Atlanticist West and its false values. And how can this be achieved? Only by unconditionally preserving the geopolitical sovereignty of the powers of the Eurasian continent, Russia, China, Iran, and India, which safeguard the freedom of all other peoples on the planet. A genuine manual for cultural guerrilla warfare. Fourth Political Theory is a book that can be seen as a complement to my own Comprende l'Empire, which has been translated into Russian by friends of Alexander Dugin's. Dugin in Moscow, I and others in Paris, while we only met for the first time in January 2011 and consulted with one another, our ideas, no doubt formulated differently, agree on all the important points, from the need to unite the value-centered right and the labor-centered left to the imperative need for resistance against the empire, from the appeal to tradition as well as to many other concepts. Once again, this shows that the only worthwhile international is that of the spirit, led by good men. Elaine Soral, translated by Sergio Michaels. Introduction. To be or not to be. In today's world, politics appears to be a thing of the past, at least as we used to know it. Liberalism persistently fought against those of its political enemies which had offered alternative systems, that is, conservatism, monarchism, traditionalism, fascism, socialism, and communism, and finally, by the end of the 20th century, had defeated them all. It would be logical to assume that politics would become liberal, while all of its marginalized opponents, surviving in the peripheral fringes of global society, would reconsider their strategies and formulate a new united front according to Alain de Benoist's periphery against the center. Instead, at the beginning of the 21st century, everything followed a different script. Liberalism, which had always insisted on de-emphasizing the importance of politics, made the decision to abolish politics completely after its triumph. Maybe this was to prevent the rise of political alternatives and to ensure its eternal rule, or because its political agenda had simply expired with the absence of ideological rivals, the existence of which Carl Schmitt had considered the indispensable for the proper construction of a political position. Regardless of the rationale, liberalism did everything possible to ensure the collapse of politics. At the same time, liberalism itself has changed, passing from the level of ideas, political programs, and declarations to the level of reality, penetrating the very flesh of the social fabric, which became suffused with liberalism, and, in turn, it began to seem like the natural order of things. This was presented not as a political process, but as a natural and organic one. As a consequence of such a historical transformation, all other political ideologies, passionately feuding against each other during the last century, lost their currency. Conservatism, fascism, and communism, together with their many variations, lost the battle, and triumphant liberalism mutated into a lifestyle, consumerism, individualism, and postmodern manifestation of the fragmented and sub-political being. Politics became biopolitical, moving to the individual and sub-individual levels. It turns out that it was not only the defeated political ideologies that left the stage, but politics itself, and even liberalism, in its ideological forms, exited. This is why it became nearly impossible to imagine an alternative form of politics. Those who do not agree with liberalism find themselves in a difficult situation. The triumphant enemy has dissolved and disappeared. Now they are left struggling against the air. How can one engage in politics if there is no politics? There is only one way out: to reject the classical political theories, both winners and losers, strain our imaginations, seize the reality of a new world, correctly decipher the challenges of postmodernity, and create something new, something beyond the political battles of the 19th and 20th centuries. Such an approach is an invitation to the development of the fourth political theory, beyond communism, fascism, and liberalism. To move forward towards the development of a fourth political theory, it is necessary to 1. Reconsider the political history of recent centuries from new positions beyond the frameworks and cliches of the old ideologies. 2. Realize and become aware of the profound structure of the global society emerging before our eyes. 3. Correctly decipher the paradigm of postmodernity. 4. Learn to oppose, not the political and projects. Anyone...
Yeah. I'll every so often I'll listen to some Alexander Dugin, because good old CIA boy, Joe Biden, decided to ban Mr. Dugan's works in the United States. So it's actually now illegal to actually own this. But the thing is that I don't see anything that is terrorist about this. What exactly is terroristic or threatening or like so much imbued in national security? What about this book, this work by Alexander Dugin is such a threat to national security that it needs to be banned from distribution in the United States? Huh? I don't see any particular reasons. It sounds to me like it's just fine. I don't see why this needs to be banned. It doesn't even talk about Ukraine. He doesn't even talk about the Ukraine war. It doesn't talk about militarism or anything. It just talks about politics. It just talks about the illegitimacy of liberalism outside of a Western Anglo-Saxon synchronistical society whose priority is the sustainability of self-ego. The whole purpose of liberalism is the sustainability of the ego. The sustainability and the ability to stretch the self's ego, or the ego of the self. It really is quite literally a Freudian world. It is a very Freudian world. It is like, what is the terminology, the century of the self? This Hungarian Jew in the early 20th century, this, what was his name? Du Bois. Not the African-American Du Bois, not W.E.B. Du Bois, but another person. A Hungarian-American Jew. And he wrote this thing about the foundations of propaganda. He wrote this in the late 20s. And every major corporation has used his ploys for their commercialization of commercial products and stuff. That's all Western society is a commercial loophole. It's a commercial consumerist loophole. That's all it is. And the precise problem and issues with the West is the technology, is high technology. It really is what Ted Kaczynski described it as being in his book, Industrial Society and Its Future. The Unabomber was right. The Unabomber was completely right.
Future by Theodore Kaczynski.
He just didn't have the correct perspective and priorize. He didn't have the right outlook and the right solutions. Okay, he didn't have the right solutions for the problem, but despite that, he very autistically described it very well in the Unabomber Manifesto. Again, the Unabomber Manifesto, it's not like Mein Kampf. It's not like My Struggle or Mein Kampf where it gives a set of solutions, where it describes the problem, explains what the problem is, and gives it a solution. It just very autistically breaks down to the very base the problems and issues of industrial society, but it doesn't really do well in describing the outcome of these problems, what they can do. It's incomplete. But even though it is very incomplete and very flawed, I still like the Unabomber Manifesto.
Movement or an organization adopts its goals as his own, then works toward those goals. When some of the goals are attained, the individual, even though his personal efforts have played only an insignificant part in the attainment of the goals, feels, through his identification with the movement or organization, as if he had gone through the power process. This phenomenon was exploited by the fascists, Nazis, and communists. Our society uses it too, though less crudely. Example, Manuel Noriega was an irritant to the U.S. Goal, punish Noriega. The U.S. invaded Panama. Effort, and punished Noriega. Attainment of goal. Thus, the U.S. went through the power process, and many Americans, because of their identification with the U.S., experienced the power process vicariously. Hence, the widespread public approval of the Panama invasion. It gave people a sense of power. We see the same phenomenon in armies, corporations, political parties, humanitarian organizations, religious or ideological movements. In particular, leftist movements tend to attract people who are seeking to satisfy their need for power. But for most people, identification with a large organization or mass movement does not fully satisfy the need for power. Another way in which people satisfy their need for the power process is through surrogate activities. As we explained in paragraphs 38 through 34, a surrogate activity is an activity that is directed toward an artificial goal that the individual pursues for the sake of the fulfillment that he gets from pursuing the goal, not because he needs to attain the goal itself. For example, there is no practical motive for building enormous muscles, hitting a little ball into a hole, or acquiring a complete series of postage stamps. Yet many people in our society devote themselves with passion to bodybuilding, golf, or stamp collecting. Some people are more other-directed than others, and therefore will more readily attach importance to a
Yeah.
simply because the people around them.
It's very autistic, the way that he explains it. There's no doubt about that. Ted Kaczynski, I've noticed, is very good about breaking down complex questions and stuff, but he doesn't offer solutions. And I understand that. And that's the flaws, okay? All these different writers have their flaws, alright? Nobody is trying to, belligerently believe everything they say. You know, I find it funny that people that, believe in Thomas Jefferson, what he said, will follow every one of his letters to the T. Everything that Jefferson wrote, it's like gospel to them. It's like hotcakes to them. But if you try to do this with Ted Kaczynski or somebody like that, it's like you're an insane person. Well, I could say the same thing about Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson didn't have all the answers. And also, he lived in an agrarian world, very different from ours. And so the solutions that Jefferson was making was to answer and deal with a slave-holding agrarian 18th century regent society, where the gentry, a land-holding gentry, had the top priority. It's completely different from the high-tech society we have now. But yes, I see that nihilism is a very bad influence. Nihilism is a dead center, one of the most sinister things that has ever been created. out of the minds of man. Like, of the most sinister and the most terrible and awful things in the universe, nihilism and this idea of complete and absolute meaninglessness is one of the most evilest things that has ever been conceived of in the history of man. And it's just absolutely awful. And Rick Perry says, Forge Gang! How are you doing, Mr. Rick Perry? What are you doing today, buddy? But yeah, did you read the title? Consensual sex is between a man and a woman. That's the title of the stream. What are your thoughts about the title, Rick Perry? I think it's a very down-to-earth and very plain-spoken and just very common sense and plain-spoken thing. Anybody in the country would agree that anybody who lives outside of the industrial West, the developed technological industrial West, would say that consensual sex is between a man and a woman. It's, after all, the only way that babies can be produced. The only way that you can have children, you can have life, and you can have a biological, realist, objective, a biological, determinist objective is to have consensual sex between an adult man and an adult woman. Rick Perry says that I'm feeling pretty slick. Rick, showing a woman in a dress. Well, Rick, I'm sure that ZXV Overlord would be very pleased to hear that. ZXV, Lamewire Jesse, and Matty Cat would be very happy and very satisfied to hear that from you, but I am none of those people. I am Forge Warhammer, and I don't feel proud about that, I have to say. Rick Perry said, read the Bible in the original. And I can't make out what that emoji is. Well, I don't know how to read Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek. So, can't really help you with that one. Maybe Drunken Surfer could help us out with his supposed knowledge of Hebrew. But anyways, yeah. We had some of Eric Drunk Chump throwing around his catch-22s, trying to make it look like he was dropping some truth bombs. When in fact, he was just basically dropping F-bombs. Just basically dropping anything short of just real absolute F-bombs, trying to make them look like truth bombs when they're really in fact catch-22s. Rick Perry says, get a good Hebrew lexicon. I could do that. I think that Strong's Concordance is outdated. Strong's Concordance is from the 1950s, so it's very outdated. It's from the 50s and the 60s, and since then there has been much more modern, much more better and more modern Hebrew lexicons and Greek lexicons, but yeah, Strong's Concordance is outdated, I would say. There's been a lot more stuff, particularly with the Dead Sea Scrolls. More knowledge about the Dead Sea Scrolls that has come out since Strong's Concordance was published. Just much more better stuff overall. But yeah, consensual sex is between a man and a woman. Like, sex in a biological, realist sense of what it originally evolved to be, or selected to do, was to have selection between a naturally selective, strong man and a naturally selective, healthy woman, being able to procreate through means of copulation into having healthy and legitimate offspring that could then carry on their genes. And because they were healthy genes, the baby would not suffer from inherited diseases because both of the parents were strong. Both of the parents were fit, therefore the baby is fit by biological inheritance, and it did inherit a lot of bad diseases. Edward Dutton, the Jolly Heretic, explains and goes into detail about it in some of his books. Rick Perry says that the lexicons are better. Rick Perry says, I have a Victorian lexicon that can't be beat. I'll post a pic of it on my Instagram. Well, that lexicon came out before the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. And one of the interesting things, and Dan McClellan points this out, Bethlehem is only mentioned 8 or 7 times in the New Testament. It's mentioned mainly in the book of Matthew and the book of Luke. It is never really mentioned. Well, it is mentioned in. No, it's not mentioned in Mark. Most references about Jesus says that he's from Nazareth and not from Bethlehem. And Dan McClellan has talked about that. Now, that doesn't mean that I just blindly believe everything that he says. I'm just saying that he is saying that that is what scholars tend to agree on. Most scholars tend to agree that Jesus was probably from Nazareth and not from Bethlehem. That's kind of a relatively newer study. Here it is.
Jesus was almost certainly born in Nazareth and not in Bethlehem. Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion, and many, if not most, scholars of the New Testament agree that the historical Jesus was probably born in Nazareth, and then traditions about him being born in Bethlehem only developed well after his death as concern grew for whether or not he fulfilled the Hebrew Bible's prophecies about the Messiah. And there are a few different reasons that scholars think this best accounts for the data. For instance, throughout the entire New Testament, it's never once Jesus of Bethlehem. It's always Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus was known to have come from Nazareth. Our earliest New Testament texts never once mention Jesus coming from Bethlehem or even mention the name Bethlehem. Paul never says it. The Gospel of Mark never says it. In fact, there are only 8 total occurrences of the name Bethlehem throughout the entire New Testament, and every single one of them occurs in reference to the expectation that the Messiah would come from Bethlehem. So we have 4 occurrences in Matthew's nativity, which is about Jesus fulfilling that prophecy. We have 2 occurrences in Luke's nativity, which is about Jesus fulfilling that prophecy. We have 1 occurrence in John chapter 7, which refers to the expectation that the Messiah would come from Bethlehem. And also, these stories immediately get Jesus back to Nazareth because everybody knew he came from Nazareth. So they seem to be stories that developed later in order to get Jesus born in Bethlehem before returning him to Nazareth, like everybody expected. And they tell the story in different ways. Matthew seems to have Jesus' parents living in Bethlehem. Then Jesus is born, and they have to flee Herod's persecution. So they go into Egypt, and they want to come back to Judea, but they can't because of Archelaus. And so they have to go north to the Galilee, and they settle in Nazareth while Jesus is still a baby. Luke tells a different story. Jesus' parents live in Nazareth, and they only temporarily come down to Bethlehem as part of this fictitious notion that a census required they return to their ancestral hometown to register. And then after they fulfill the days of their purification and present Jesus in the temple, they go back home to Nazareth. They don't have to flee anything because there's no threat there. So we have two different stories of getting Jesus born in Bethlehem and then getting him right back to Nazareth, which suggests that the traditions about him being born in Bethlehem developed well after his death and are supplemental to the foundational story of his life, and they arose just in response to growing concern for whether or not he fulfilled the Hebrew Bible's prophecies about where the Messiah would come from. And so many, if not most scholars of the New Testament agree that the best accounting of the data has Jesus being born in Nazareth, and only later do traditions develop about him being born in Bethlehem. And the fit for this video has been the Mignola Hellboy.
All right, so yeah, that's very interesting research by Dan McClellan. Interdimensional Lizard says, I enjoyed these 2 lecture series on the Yale Courses channel on YouTube. Introduction to the Old Testament with Christine Hayes and New Testament History and Literature with Dale B. Martin. Yeah, Yale has some good stuff. Most modern college courses are extremely woke and very libtarded, and they paint things with a very broad woke lens that I just don't really care much about. Rick Perry says that he has posted them on his Instagram. They are good resources.
Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion. Let's take a look at a video.
Many people say that there's no archaeological evidence for the Old Testament, but you say just the opposite. Why? Oh, there is abundant evidence from archaeology to support the Bible, and more keeps getting found year after year.
All right, let's see it.
If you go way back to the time of the patriarchs, we have all kinds of place names and personal names that are corroborated in the archaeological record with the names mentioned in Scripture.
So the fact that there are personal and place names that fit that time and that place in the patriarchal narratives is not in any way, shape, or form whatsoever evidence of historical accuracy. The overwhelming preponderance of evidence precludes historical accuracy and demonstrates these stories were actually written toward the middle or even the end of the first millennium BCE, not the end of the third millennium and beginning of the second millennium BCE. For instance, Genesis is written in Hebrew. Hebrew didn't even exist until the end of the second millennium BCE. These stories are written in narrative prose. Narrative prose was not used in alphabetic languages until the 9th century BCE at the earliest. We also have reference 7 times in the book of Genesis to the Philistines, to Abimelech as the king of the Philistines, to the Philistines stopping up wells in the days of Abraham, to people traveling to the land of the Philistines. But the Philistines didn't even arrive in this part of the world and become a people group until the 12th century BCE, around 800 years after Abraham was supposed to have lived. You also have a reference in Genesis 14:14 to someone traveling to Dan, a location that was named after the tribe of Dan, a tribe which was named after a person named Dan, a person who was the son of Jacob, who was the grandson of Abraham. So a reference to someone traveling to the land of Dan in the time of Abraham is clearly anachronistic. And when you put all this together, what you get is stories that were written down in the second or the third quarter of the first millennium BCE, with no evidence of historical accuracy.
You've got evidence of the Israelites being in Egypt and the cities like Ramses and Pithom that the Bible says they built up, and then abandonment of those cities at the right time.
There is absolutely no evidence whatsoever of Israelites ever being in either of those cities, and those cities were abandoned slowly over time because of the relocation of the services that were provided in those cities, not because suddenly everybody left. That's not supported by any data whatsoever.
You've got the entrance of the Israelites into Canaan, testified to by the Amarna letters.
There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that the Amarna letters ever once refer to any Israelites whatsoever. This claim is based on the false etymological link between the term Habiru and the ethnic designation Hebrew, which comes many centuries after the Amarna letters. There's no etymological connection between the two. Habiru is just a broad, generic, non-ethnic designation for different nomadic people groups that occupied the periphery of civilization and every now and then would engage in raids or would otherwise harass sedentary people groups and cities. They have nothing to do with the Hebrews.
The destruction of cities like Hatzor, Jericho, and Ai.
There are absolutely no data that connect the destruction of these three cities to Israelites. They were also destroyed across a very long range of time, going from the middle of the 16th century BCE down to the 12th century BCE. So they cannot have been destroyed as part of a conquest. And archaeologists are in overwhelming agreement that the conquest narrative is not historical and is a much later literary creation.
The Judges period matches perfectly.
It absolutely does not. However, there are scholars, and I agree with them, who argue that some of these social memories that are represented within the book of Judges preserve some historical elements from earlier periods. However, they are embedded within much later literary creations and configurations that are not historical.
The kings like David and Solomon built monumental cities and the temple and all these kinds of things right up through the Persian period and on it goes.
So once we get to the Omride dynasty, the archaeological data begins to correspond in very broad terms with the history that is represented in the Hebrew Bible, and there is evidence that a dynasty known as the House of David was operative in the 9th century BCE, which may preserve memory of a Davidic chiefdom, certainly not a kingdom that was established in the century before. But this chiefdom of David wasn't remotely the size that is represented in the Hebrew Bible. That is a fiction that was used to prop up the power structures that were associated with the Davidic dynasty. So we still don't have historical accuracy, but we have pieces of historical accuracy that begin to be discernible around the time of David, but more clearly in the next century or two after.
So absolutely, there is powerful testimony to Scripture and its accuracy from archaeology.
No, there's not. What there is a lot of misinformation, a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of confirmation bias. In other words, there's an awful lot of dogma. And the fit for this video has been the Gotham Sirens.
All right, so there you go. Yeah, some of his stuff is okay. He tends to get a little bit woke at times, and I'm not going to say that all of the complaints that the woke people say are wrong. Obviously, there are some itinerant things that the woke people claim that is based on a degree of truth. But it is just that. It is a variant degree of truth, but it is contemporary to their own personal preferential biases. They have a predetermined, presuppositionalized bias with how they use this, and it just gets to where it is a dogma. Wokeness is a religious dogma, and it's all religious dogmas. Let's see here. Interdimensional Lizard says, the only wokeness I can recall is that they asked the students to use CE and BCE instead of AD and BC. Yeah, personally, I just use AD and BC. And it's not because I am like a religious bigot. Not at all. That has just been the traditional way of dating stuff since the 6th century AD. Since Anno Domini or Anno Domini was put into place in the middle of the 6th century AD. I think as a result of Pope Gregory the Great, or Pope Gregory the Great, but I'm not for sure, but that is usually what it is attributed to traditionally. We don't know exactly when the BC AD calendar was put into place, but it was definitely put into place with the mindset of Christ being at the center of the universe and therefore at the very center of time itself. All time and all creation and all derivatives of creation must come from the one true God, and therefore dating chronology, including pre-existent or pre-existent chronology before the time of Christ, was to do that. I don't have a problem with using either the BCE or the BC or the CE or AD calendar things. I don't see it as that important. It doesn't have to necessarily be devolved into a religious and a theism versus atheism criteria thing.
World of social media musician videos where popularity doesn't seem to correlate with actual talent. Why is this heartwarming video of a stroke victim only being shared for?
Okay, Rick Perry says that biblical higher criticism is the principle of Protestant atheism. That is a absolute nonsensical thing to say. Protestantism is a branch of Christianity, and there's no doubt that Protestantism, at least authentic doctrinal Protestantism, is fixed upon the idea of sola scriptura and solus fides. Atheism is just the lack of belief in something. And so the two definitions of those things don't really fit together per se. But I'll leave that up to you. Most of the archaeological data seems to start getting into sync with the Bible around the time of the Judges. And it's from the time of the Judges, and probably even later than that, when we see the archaeology, the traditional chronology, the critical new chronology finally begin to line up. So it's just, most archaeologists agree that the conquest of Canaan did not happen in the way that it was said in the book of Joshua, and that's just what they say. That's not even me that's saying that, that's what they said. Rick Perry says, the fullness of time. Well, it just sounds like you're extremely dogmatic, Rick Perry. And I'm actually not surprised that you're religious and also woke at the same time. Biblical higher criticism is the product of Protestantism, and atheism is Protestantism's natural conclusion. Look around at the 33,000 denominations. Well, actually, before the American Revolution broke out, there was only one church. There was just one defined official church that you could go to. If you went to another sect or were in another sect, you actually couldn't vote or hold office in the Anglican American colonies. After the American Revolution, the doctrine of religious liberty began to be practiced, and that's when you begin to really see out of the Second Great Awakening all of these different branches and sects and would-be theologians and ideas coming out. It's coming out of the Second Great Awakening. And also, in the 2nd century AD, there were Marcionites, there were Ebionites, there were Nazarenes, Ebiosites, and Gnostics and Neo-Gnostics. So already in the 2nd century AD, there was already splits within the early apostolic church. So, which of the 2nd century churches is the true successor of the 1st century church? Because that only gets answered in the 4th century, allegedly by the Church of Chalcedon and by the Trinitarian Chalcedonian Rite. So it is the Chalcedonian Rite They'll become the Roman Catholic and the Orthodox, but not the Oriental Orthodox churches, because Oriental Orthodox are Monophysites. So, and they all disagree on who is the first century church. Those aforementioned heresies found a new home in Protestantism. Well, I mean, the Monophysites and the Nestorians are not Protestants, and they still exist, even today. Islam was very influenced by the Ebionites, and Muslims and Ebionites share a lot of common things. And even Roman Catholic and Orthodox Christian biblical scholars will disagree with you, Rick Perry, if you try to say that there is more of a correlation between the Ebionites and the Protestants than there are between the Ebionites and the Muslims. Or if you try to claim that the Nestorians and the Monophysites are Protestants. So, like, they will tell you that you're wrong. I don't need to tell you anything. They can just tell you that you are wrong in that regard about it. So yeah, some more tyranny over the minds of man. You would have been burned at the stake in the Middle Ages for espousing homosexuality and sodomy, Rick Perry. In the Middle Ages, you would have been burned at the stake for being a sodomite. I don't want nothing to happen to you. I don't care what you do. I don't care what your sexual orientation is. I'm just telling you. In the Middle Ages, unless you were a eunuch, you would have been burned at the stake for male prostitution. You would have been burned at the stake for soliciting and selling pornography like you do on your websites, or on the websites that you're on, Rick Perry. So it's like you're defending Paul, and Paul clearly says that there is no sex out of marriage. Paul says that there is no sex out of wedlock. Let's see here. Why there... Okay, that's Islam. Never forget that. Let's see here. Genesis. In Christian theology, sex outside of marriage is considered sinful and immoral. Genesis 2:24, Matthew 19:4-6. Okay, so yeah, Paul says it in 1 Corinthians 6:18-20. Hebrews was... Most scholars say that Hebrews was written by Luke. Some people say it was written by Paul. Most scholars tend to say it was Luke. Luke the evangelist. The Catholic Apostolic Episcopacies define Christianity. They absolutely don't, because those things began to be formed only in the 4th century. Only in the 4th and the 5th century do you have the full defining of these so-called apostolic episcopacies. Rome was just one of many bishoprics. The only thing that speaks that's contrary to this is the epistles of Clement, which are supposedly dated to the 1st century. Rick Perry says that that is not true. Read Chaucer's Accountabary Tales, among many other contemporaneous accounts. Well, Chaucer was not a theologian. Chaucer was a proist. Geoffrey Chaucer was a medieval proist. He was a literarian proist, and he was not a theologian. He wasn't even a monk. let's see here. Geoffrey Chaucer. I read some of the Canterbury Tales, but Chaucer was not a theologian. He was not even a cleric. Literature gives an account of how things were at the time. That is somewhat true. Okay, there's always been monks that butt-fuck each other in the monasteries. Yes, there's always been some monks that have had butt sex. That doesn't mean that all of them do that. That doesn't mean that all monks hurt children just because a very small proportional minority have done so. That doesn't mean that they're all gay. But that also shows that this idea of a gay celibate clerical celibacy, that's just an endorsement for gayness. It's just a pure endorsement for sodomizing. Obviously, not all clerics or monastic orders are into that. There's definitely Protestant pastors that do that as well. But what does this have to do with the so-called legitimacy of apostolic Catholic dogma? Most forms of Roman Catholic dogma were not really fully defined until about the 4th century. Yes, there is some evidence in the 3rd century AD that the Virgin Mary was venerated, but the Syriac Church does not believe in the, the assumption of the Theotokos. The Syriac Church does not believe in the assumption of the Theotokos. Like, there's proof in Syriac literature that although the Virgin Mary is definitely venerated, the Syriac Church does not believe in the Holy Dormition. That's something that non-Syriac Oriental Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholics follow. So it is what it is. There are a lot of inconsistencies about the Bible, I will admit. That doesn't mean that I don't think that God inspired the scriptures. It's just that I think that data is present over dogma, and there's no total inerrancy. I no longer believe that there is total inerrancy. It's laughable to think that this entire planet was created in 7 days. It's laughable to think that everything in this entire universe, in all these galaxies, was created in 7 days. Especially when the wavelength of light can only travel at such a speed. And it takes billions of light years to go across all of these clusters of galaxies. And we have the James Webb and the Hubble telescope, and they get light waves from billions of light years away. There's just no way the universe was created only a few thousand years ago. And there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever for a worldwide flood. Even Christian Identity, even William Finck and Christian Identity don't believe in a worldwide flood. You know, just in case Ghost of Niccolo is watching, I know that you're kind of into some of William Finck's stuff. I mean, William Finck is definitely not an atheist, and he doesn't believe in a worldwide flood. But yeah, they have not been debunked, Rick Perry. The quantum theory is correct. It does appear that the quantum mechanical theory of the universe is right, and so is special and general relativity. And you are the one that is for want of evidence and for proof. And the lack thereof demonstrates your own ignorance or your bias, your own preferential bias in this regard. It is laughable to think that there was a worldwide flood. It is laughable to think that there is only 7 days in which everything in existence was created. These are the ravings of a madman. Light as wave and particle have both been debunked. Okay, can you provide evidence to show the contrary? If they are contradictory, then you are apt to prove guilty until proven innocent. You are apt to cite your sources. But yeah, I don't really give a shit about Trump. Trump is just an old boomer. Dude, the guy is an old fucking geezer. He doesn't relate in any way whatsoever. So, it's just nonsense. Well, if you're not going to cite your sources, Rick Perry, and show that you're right in your claims, then you're wrong. They made the claims in their theories. The burden of proof is open on them to establish onus probandi fallacy. Well, just cite your sources and give your citations. I'm not going to do your research. I'm not going to do the hard work for you if you're not going to even cite the sources. I can just say that stuff is mainstream. It's been established. Tons of research has been done. Tons of research has been done into this stuff, and it shows very well that light travels billions, hundreds of billions, if not trillions of light years to reach its place. That shows that the universe is billions of years old. If you go to the Grand Canyon and to these wide open crevices and canyons and ravines, and you look at how deep they are, there's just no way that rainwater by itself could pour down and cause enough of an erosion of the rocks in just a few thousand years to get to the shape that they're at. That takes hundreds of millions of years at the very least to do. So, and now you're the one that's sounding like an SS Israel tard. You like to poke, I find it funny that you like to poke fun at Southern Israelite, but now you're using claims that the Southern Israelite makes to prove your ideas and your schemes, or to push forward your schemes and ideas. Well, it's over with now. Alright, I'm back. Yeah, I just, no, light is energy. It's photons that act as waves and particles. So photons are the particles that act as both beams and waves. But yeah, it's not an onus probandi fallacy to state scientific facts. Subatomic particles are real. They have literally used electronic microscopes to break down to the very atoms, to single atoms. It is very possible to take electronic microscopes and break stuff down to almost single atoms. Single atoms have been broken, and the wavelengths of electrons and the electron stuff going around atoms has been measured. These things have been very much observed. It's not light. Light is just the outflow of energy. It's produced by photons, and photons are both the waves and also the particles. And yes, in quantum reality, they can be both. Quantum space is not the same as our space. It's entirely different. It's a whole different entire ball game down there, buddy. That is a paradigmatic assumption. Atoms have never been observed. They have. I've seen actual photographs of them for myself. They kind of look like suns in a way. They look very orange and yellowish, and they look kind of like suns or stars. It's just really pure energy. They're held together by gravitational waves. It's like the reason why atoms just don't fly apart at the most random juncture is because of gravitational waves. Southern Israelites' work on the philosophy of science is very good. To discount it because of personal animus would be a fallacy of composition. Oh yeah, dude. And I remember when you were calling me a Southern Israelite boy. I remember when you were saying that, oh, he's just a Southern Israelite boy, and now you're citing Southern Israelite. That shows how dishonest you are. Rick Perry, that shows how intellectually dishonest you are. Just like you don't want to come out as a preterist. And when I say preterist, I mean it has a theological term, by the way. But like, you don't even want to honestly tell people that you're a preterist. So I mean, here is Rick Perry citing things from a semi-Aryan. Cartoons. Stating they're cartoons is not a fallacy. Not at all. SI's theology is very much imperfect. Well, every theology that is made out of the minds of man is flawed. And if you want to talk about a fallen world and the fallen state of man, you can say that all sciences are inherently flawed. That is true. But then you also have to say that all human contrived theologies are flawed in the same way, and for the same reasons. The only way that you can be intellectually honest and consistent about you talking about how man is in an imperfect state is to say that both science and theology, including your own, is inherently flawed and incomplete. To say anything other would show a lack of consistency and honesty on your own part. And even I don't think that you would sink that low. My eschatology is the standard amillennial partial preterism. Yeah, I know. It's the same thing that the Thomists believe. I get it. You follow the perennial eschatology, the kind of perennialist and Thomist eschatology of the Augustinian scholastics. and kind of the Aristotelian, Augustinian, scholastic schools out of which that Thomist philosophy came from. After all, it was derived from Thomas Aquinas. I mean, I wouldn't say he was the only person that invented Thomism, but he is accredited to it. Nobody has suggested that reason is perfect. That is why Aquinas stated reason and revelation has the epistemic foundation. Well, there you go. Then by your own summation, by your very own standard that you hold, you cannot hold me to dogmatic pure perfection. You cannot hold me to the standard of your own dogmatic perfection because you don't even know yourself that man under original sin can actually reason theology perfectly. After all, you can't even agree that man can reason science perfectly in an imperfect state. Who's to say that he could also be able to reason theology in an imperfect state, regardless of the revelation of Scripture or tradition? If man in his fallen state cannot reason a perfect science, then likewise he is unable to reason a perfect theology outside of the Scriptures and the traditions. And it's very obvious that not everything that Thomas Aquinas was talking about related solely to Scripture and tradition, because he was also quoting from Aristotle. The simple fact that he was quoting from Aristotle demonstrates that he was using the very same type of philosophical foundations and mores and thought forms as Plato and Aristotle that atheists use. Straw man argument, I made no such claims. You have a habit of ascribing positions to others that they do not hold. You're trying to hold me to the standard that in an imperfect state of original sin, I cannot ascribe to science, because science is flawed, because science was made by an imperfect mind that is incapable of a complete and perfect reason. And so I'm putting you to the test. I'm just testing you by your own standards. You're telling me that I cannot take quantum mechanics and hold it up as a position to ascribe logic because of original sin. So I'm just saying that you cannot uphold your theology over me as the burden of truth because it was created and rationalized by an imperfect man fallen in original sin, just in the same way as with a scientist. So, to hold to your standard, scientists and theologians are both fallen in original sin, and therefore, without the light of God, they cannot ascribe to perfect reason, and therefore, science and theology is both fundamentally flawed when it's not ascribed to revelation. If you can't hold to that, then you're in an inconsistent position. You are not logical, and you're inconsistent with your schematics. Your schematics are off. And no, it is not a straw man argument to say. You can't even admit that you're a preterist. I forced you. The only reason you admitted that you're a preterist, Rick Perry, is because I made you. I forced you to have to give out the answer that you are. You had to give in and admit that you're a preterist, which means that you're influenced by Jesuit theology. Preterism was crafted in part by a Spanish Jesuit. And to ascribe to preterism shows that you were influenced by Jesuit teachings, Jesuit perennial teachings and philosophies. Forms are valid ways of describing intangible invariants, such as numbers of laws. The only difference on the biblical model would be whether those forms are created or uncreated, re. pantheism. Well, that might be so. But Plato said that there was a perfect plane of forms, a perfect world or a perfect state of forms and ideas, but an imperfect state of material, an imperfect, flawed material world. And that's partially what Plato talked about. Aristotle went deeper in his metaphysics. Aristotle described the particulars. Plato described the absolutes. Aristotle broke it down and gave anecdotes and footnotes, and further broke it down into the particulars. And that is what Western science has primarily been since then. Western science, post-Socratic, has been basically describing these forms, basing these forms, and finding their absolutes or their particulars. More so their particulars than anything else. But yes, the science is very standard and it's self-evident and self-describing. I don't have to prove nothing to you. Amillennial and partial preterism is a tradition of Christian hermeneutic. The Jesuitical subversion you're thinking of is futurist eschatology. Yeah, I am not a millenarian. I'm not a millenarian, Rick Perry. I'm not a Joachimite millenarian. I'm not a Joachimite millenarianist. I do not believe in some kind of a future type of, what is it called? A future rapture. I do not believe in the coming rapture, Rick Perry. I don't believe in a rapture. I am not a post-millennialist. I don't know enough about premillennialism, but I definitely do not subscribe to post-millennialism. I do not believe in a future, I forgot. A future rapture. I do not believe that Christians will be raptured before the reign of the Antichrist. But quantum mechanics, special and general relativity are self-evident. They are real. Light can also behave as both waves and lengths. It's actually the photons that act as particles, and it is the charged light that goes through empty space that operates as waves. Because the quantum world is completely different on the scale of what it is from that of the physical world. In the physical space, it will behave as a wavelength of energy, which is light. On the quantum level, it'll be particles, which are photons. Photons and light are not mutually the same thing, but they are intercorrelated. Just as electrons, photons, and protons, neutrons, and electrons go together and create a single atom. They are not the same material. Leptons and quarks are not the same material. But they do correlate, and they build the foundations of the universe. Abduction theory. Abduction fallacy, theories, and storytelling, same thing. Well, you just told me a story about Thomas Aquinas. Telling me stories and taking me on a little road trip about what medieval theologians believed and what Chaucer wrote in the Canterbury Tales is the same thing. Saying that Chaucer wrote about homosexuals is abduction. Okay, sodomites were still tortured and punished in the Middle Ages. That was deduction, not abduction. Let's see here. Code of Truth says, Forge! Rick Perry says, gang! No, you did try to deduce that because Geoffrey Chaucer was writing about a homosexual monk, that somehow that deduced that homosexuality was acceptable in biblical and medieval times, when in fact it was not. Sodomites were tortured and were punished in the Middle Ages. But yes, Chad is really not the place to give footnotes and stuff. I get that. You could just post footnotes if you don't want to show citations, but it's whatever. Forms are valid ways of describing intangible invariants such as numbers or laws. The only difference on the biblical model would be whether those forms are created or uncreated. The universe began with the Big Bang, Rick Perry. The entire universe and the entire cosmos was created out of the Big Bang. Whether there was something before the Big Bang, and there probably was, or whether it came out as a result of creatio ex nihilo, is up for debate. But regardless, nobody knows. We do not have instruments that can go back and detect it that far back. Well, actually, we can detect the microwave radiation, Rick Perry. It is possible to pick up the microwave radiation left over from the Big Bang. And the fact that the universe is itself expanding with galaxies moving away, and the fact the universe is expanding, and the fact that there is microwave and ultra-red or infrared radiation and Hawking's radiation across the universe actually shows that it is in fact a reality. But yes, the Big Bang is a theory, but it is a very good and well-tangible theory. It's much better than the very fraudulent notion that the entire world could have been created in 7 days. Code of Truth says that Rick Perry will harass you with endless mind games, giving contradicting opinions, each coming from his multiple personalities. He is the epitome of a mind control victim of the intel agencies. I think you're probably right, Code of Truth. Maybe he'll tell us the story about an amphibian, about how amphibians can walk on water. Maybe he can describe to us about his stories about amphibians walking on water and tell us about trannies and amphibians walking on water and all these other funny, hilarious things that he likes to do. The Big Bang is basically a materialist remanufacturing of Plotinus's monad doctrine. The notion of the monad was pre-existed Plotinus. The notion of the existence of a monad prefigures Plotinus and his school of thought. Plotinus was a student of Origen, actually. So, the existence and notions of the monad pre-exists Plotinus or even Neoplatonism as such. But yeah, and also the Jesuit Teilhard de Chardin was the one that created the Big Bang Theory. And you make up these vague assertions that Protestants are the ones that created atheism. Atheism was created by the pagan Greeks. Atheism was conceived of by the polytheistic Greeks, not the Protestants. Code of Truth says that Rick Perry's mind has likely been scrambled by drugs psychedelics, and other mental torture techniques. Yes. Well, his arguments are definitely catch-22s. Rick Perry's stuff is just a lot of catch-22s and bare assertion. The things that Rick Perry talks about is just bare assertions. Like when he says that light cannot operate as both waves and as particles. That's bare assertion. That's pure absolute bare assertions fallacy. You want me to move the table out or not?
We will in just a minute. I'm talking myself.
Okay, take your time. Yeah. The photons are the waves. Well, the photons are what are the particles. The light is the wave of energy. But yeah, Teilhard de Chardin did originate the Big Bang Theory. It was a Belgian Roman Catholic who created the concept in the 1930s, the 1940s of the Big Bang Theory, saying that light cannot behave as both waves and particles is a bare bones assertion. Let's see here. What do we have here? I don't know. Rick Perry is pretty consistent, even though he makes up a lot of very crude assertions about the understanding of the ontology of reality. His empiricist conceptions are very vague and rather flawed, but he does assert a pretty good demonstrative mutability. Like, Rick Perry can obviously understand what he is describing and what he is saying. I'm not sure if his brain is that scrambled, I don't know, but I don't think that he's a Terry Davis person. Bare assertion, fallacy. De Chardin was not the originator of the Big Bang Theory. Yeah, you told me that it comes from the monad without giving me proper citations and footnotes on where you draw those conclusions from. You have just demonstrated your ignorance of fallacies, Chody. You apply them out of context like a hick. Well, that's not me, dude. That's not me doing that. I apply them perfectly. Let's see here. Code of Truth says that he is a Northwestern European. He is not an African American. I don't know where race got into this, okay? We were talking about science and moralism and moral theology and morality and the basis of existence and ontology of self. We were not talking about race. Richard Pooney, you are so emasculated, not I. Rick Perry, you're so effete and demoralized, you can only express masculinity by aping the behavior of those who are allowed to express it, sad, defeated man. Dance for me, monkey. Come on, guys. Come on, guys, now. There's no need to fight like that. You guys don't need to fight each other like that. Come on. We can get along. We can all get along with each other. I can promise you that we can all get along and understand each other. It does not have to end in a circle jerk. It doesn't have to go into the level of a complete circle jerk. Come on, guys. Come on, guys. Why don't you guys just freaking hug and make up? I'm not saying that you should have sex, gay sex. Just hug and make up. You know, bear cub hug. You know, give each other a bear hug and calm down, you know. There's no need for that kind of animosity, dude. Let's see here. Chody of Truth is basically a scuffed Sky Mask Andy. Dance for me, monkey. Let's see here. Code of Truth says, I am not demoralized. Richard Pooney, you have given up on masculinity. You have changed your gender because of it. You have no grounds to define what masculinity is. Ah, come on, guys. You got me laughing there. You got me. Fuck, you got me laughing on that. Damn. But anyways, where were we? Or where was I? Yeah, there's just no way that there was a great flood. There was no worldwide flood of Noah. And there was no creation in 7 days. It's just, this stuff is just tyranny over the minds of man. This is just tyranny over the minds of man. Rick Perry says that he is just a ladylike gentleman. Well, there you go. He is a gentleman. He is not a ladies' gentleman, but he is the men's gentleman. Most gentlemen would say that they are a ladies' gentleman. He just says that he is a lady-like, or a lady-akin gentleman. Code of Truth says, I can tell that my transgressions against you has given you a seething rage beyond my comprehension. Yes, dude. Hopefully he doesn't get triggered by your microaggressions. Here we are going into the bullshit that is wokeness again. This bullshit nonsense of absolute wokeness. Keep dreaming, budget bin Eminem. More projections. Mere projections. Could there have been... Okay, Interdimensional Lizard finally says something interesting here. Could there have been a great flood due to a meteor impact on an ice cap during the Ice Age? People say that the Black Sea flooded. At some point after the end of the last major glacial event, after the end of the last major ice age, the last glacial maximum, there is mention made about the Black Sea flooding over. Like, there's talks about the Black Sea flooding over into the Mediterranean, and stuff like that, Interdimensional Lizard. But in regards to a worldwide flood, there are some mythology among the Polynesians and the Chinese about there being a great flood. There is the notion of stories of a flood myth with the Chinese and the Polynesians, the Aztecs, and the Mayans. And maybe also the Indians. I'm talking about India, the ancient India. But in regards for like the material evidence of a worldwide flood, there is none there. There was a snowball Earth from 750 million years ago, or about 1.5 billion years ago, but that's really it. No Noahic flood. Nothing like what George Stanley Faber describes in his The Origins of Pagan Idolatry. Microaggressions is what contained in Chode's pants. There's no need to get triggered, guys. There's no need to get triggered. That's why he's scared to show and tell, LOL. Rick Perry is writing his fantasies in chat. Okay, bro. So, is Rick Perry now America First? Because, like, Doria the Doll and Lena Law are like America First people. And those guys are basically fascists, and I just don't really care for them. I don't really like those kind of people. I hate the America First movement. I don't give a shit about them. I can't really say that I feel the same of the MAGAs, but like, yeah, those guys are just kind of borderline fascists. You know, I know earlier in this stream I cited Mein Kampf when I was talking about Ted Kaczynski and Alexander Dugin. Yes, I did describe fascism. But that is an intellectual, high-level, preferential fascism. It is a perennialist type of fascism. It's not the kind of crude bullshit of the America First. Okay, I just don't like them. They're low culture. One thing that I do like about the Catholics is they have a love and a high regard for classic culture. Protestants don't. Protestants, at least for the most part, do not have a regard for classical and Renaissance culture. Rita Love is now aligned with Richard Spencer. Dude, that guy is fucking cringe. That guy is such a retard. That guy is just cringe. He's like a Jordan Peterson wannabe without being Jordan Peterson. He's just basically trying to be the Gen X Jordan Peterson, and he's not even good at doing it. But she's still in league with Pariah the Doll et al. Randall Carlson is one person who claims that there is physical evidence of a catastrophic global flood, but there are competing theories. And that's the problem, too, is that aside from a few mythological underpinnings that are each related to their own regional interests, there is just no absolute uncontrived evidence that there is a global flood. It just doesn't exist. These ideas and these things out of the Bible are just not always accurate. The Bible is not accurate on everything. There's contradictions in some of these things in the Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament. Or the Christian New Testament, bro. Yeah, I'm just watching the Westerns right now. I think that's the Great Pacific Western. But yeah, I don't know if there's a Westerns channel in Great Britain or not. But I'm just watching these Westerns and stuff. They're mythological and, of course, in 19th century North America on the frontier, the things described in the movies were not how it actually happened. Hollywood mythologizes everything that actually happened, and the truth is much darker compared to what the movies show. But that's what's great about mythology, that's what's great about Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. It's interesting and it's fun to look into. It's bullshit, yes, it is complete bullshit. But it's not supposed to be logical, it's just supposed to be entertaining. You don't watch or observe fantasy for the logical, or to search for the logical impunities. You watch it simply for the sake of it being fiction and for entertainment. It is an enjoyment to indulge in, and it's not something to really give much of a thought about. Rick Perry says, agreed, he cannot stand any politics. He is just aligned with based and hard religious tranners. Well, I mean, what do you think about the Pope breaking canon law? Like, Rick Perry, what do you think about Pope Francis going into Hindu temples, Buddhist temples and shrines and mosques, Protestant churches and synagogues and whatnot, and pagan sites and atheistic places of engagement? I mean, I'm just saying, if the Pope was a Catholic layman or just a typical parish priest, and he did the things that he's doing as the Pope, he would be excommunicated. The only reason that he can't be excommunicated for breaking canon law is because he's the Pope. He's the Papus. He's the Popa. He's the Great Poopa. El Great Poopa. Rick Perry says, settle down, son. Let's see here. It's not ideal, obviously. Well, no, I mean, I would argue it's not been ideal since Vatican I. Obviously, there was flaws in Vatican I, but Vatican II is when things got really crazy for that church. Like, that the Roman Catholic Church lost all of its sense of morals in Vatican II, 1962 to 1965. Sarca Anno Domini. Anno Domini. Code of Troops says, cope. Rick Perry says, I already read that. Spencer must be some kind of Fed. I think he is, Interdimensional Lizard. Rick Perry says that Dee Dee and Elaine Miller are probably intelligence, or intel. They're not feds, but they're intel. 9 Five Eyes Nations intel. And by the way, someone on Discord gave me Elaine Miller's phone number in the UK. Somebody has been giving me phone numbers and info to contact her, and if she is intel, that would mean that it's an attempt to try to get me into trouble, or like to co-opt in getting me into trouble with these intel agencies. And that's obviously what's happening. Someone is trying to get me to do something to be compromised. Rick Perry says, look at the Arian heresy. Only a handful of bishops remained faithful until they were eventually vindicated ex post facto. Well, that was long after Athanasius' lifetime, Rick Perry. That was long after Saint Athanasius was in the grave in North Africa or in Syria or Constantinople. I don't know where he died. He was the Bishop of Alexandria in Egypt, I believe. But the Arian heresy was only dealt with long after Saint Athanasius was dead in the grave. Long after John of Damascus, Saint John of Damascus was dead in the grave, man. Like, they would have had John Chrysostom and Saint Athanasius would have had no idea that eventually Arianism was going to fall out. It had a particular appealing in North Africa and in the Germanic lands. It had a particular appealing in some of the Greek-speaking and Semitic areas, and it later spread into the Gothic tribes that went, the Goths and the Vandals that went into North Africa and Spain and Italy. They became Arianists before they reconverted to Romanistic Trinitarianism or Romanistic Orthodox Trinitarianism. I don't really think that they would have necessarily called themselves Roman Catholics in plural. They would have called themselves Roman Rite Trinitarianist Latin-speaking Orthodox, or Western Orthodoxists. In essence, that's what Roman Catholicism is. It's Western Neo-Thomist Trinitarianistic Chalcedonian Orthodoxy, but Western Filioque Immaculate Conception Papal Primacy or Papal Primical Orthodoxy. In essence, that just doesn't follow Christist Victor hermeneutics per se. The Western Church is also a bit more Aristotelian. Aristotelian in terms of its overall hermeneutics compared to the Eastern Church. The Eastern Church is more Neoplatonic. I'm going to be honest, I think a lot of this apostolic Roman episcopacy stuff only happened as a reaction to Arianism. It only came about as a reaction to adoptionism, Arianism, Ebionitism, and Gnosticism. If those heresies had never existed, the Catholic and Orthodox churches would not be what they are now. Like, they were only defined as a result of the ecumenical councils and by the creeds of the church. And those creeds were specifically reactions done to those early heresies. My advice is to stay in the church like they did. Hold fast to that which is good, and don't allow heretics to annex the faithful from the church. Well, I've only went to Mass one time, Rick Perry, and I never really felt part of the church. Like, I don't agree with the clerical hierarchy, and I'm not into the organizational stuff. I just don't care about it. It's tyrannical. The hierarchies are tyrannical. Hierarchies and organizations are inherently tyrannical to the individual self, the individual person, and it just represents a form of tyranny over the minds of man. That is the point, though. The Arian heresy was very early in church history. These issues with heresies have always been present. Well, I mean, Richard Abrani has said that the Catholic Church embraced universalistic salvation, or like the idea of grace based on ignorance, the conception that a savage on an island that never had heard of the grace of Jesus can be, by the very mercy of Jesus, saved. Or the idea that unborn children can go straight to limbo when they die. I do not differentiate between the churches that hold to the Chalcedonian theology. That's the definition of Catholic apostolic, as far as I am concerned. Yeah, well, that's the Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and mainline Protestants. They hold to the apostolic Catholic rite. The Nestorians, the Monophysites, and the Oriental Orthodox, they rejected the Chalcedonian theology. Rick Perry says that theology within the ecumenical councils always reacted to heresy, but nothing was developed doctrinally, only explicated and elucidated. I think that the modern Catholic and Orthodox churches were a result of, and were formed as a result of, the apostolic traditions and the ecumenical councils. The ecumenical councils defined the creed. They brought the bishops together, and they got the bishops to agree on a common creed in order to react to and deal with the heresy. So in a way, those episcopacies were only formed in the 4th century as a result of the recent legitimization that was done by Constantine the Great. Prior to Constantine the Great, prior to Theodosius the Great, you don't have at least outside of Ethiopia and Georgia, you don't have this conception of a church and state relationship. It does not begin until it does with Constantine, with Saint Constantine the Great. But yeah, anyways, I got off script. But yeah, Richard Spencer is a piece of shit. Richard Spencer is a complete and total moron. Theology within the ecumenical councils always reacted to heresy, but nothing was developed doctrinally, only explicated and elucidated. Yes, ecumenical, conciliar, synodal, and collegiate governance, the exercise of the Church's authority. That was in the first millennium, Rick Perry. That was in the first millennium. In the second millennium, it was the College of Cardinals and the Magisterium that took over and began to exercise the Western Church's authority. And they stopped doing the whole synodal stuff. The ecumenical councils were called by the popes. The popes, the cardinals, and the bishops. And it was done as a response to the authority of the pope and College of Cardinals, and that became the basis of the Church's authority in the second millennium AD. What you're talking about is more of the first millennium, and that's the tradition that the Eastern Church took up, but not the Western Church, at least not after the Third Lateran Council. And also, the Eastern Church accepted that at the Council of Basel. At the Council of Basel, Ferrara, and Venice, the Eastern Church accepted the papal primacy. They just didn't finish because they withdrew from the Council of Basel. Spencer is a Nietzschean midwit. Yeah, well, I don't claim to hold Nietzsche on a high post. But regardless, I fucking own Soybachew. I smashed Soybachew to pieces. I have smashed Soberman's mind. I smashed Soberman's mind, and I smashed King of Pull's mind. Okay, if you watch that upload, that King of Pull upload on Impressa's channel, I destroyed King of Pull's mind. His brain was broken. His mind was shattered by me. I also broke Soberman. I have defeated Soberman, the Dark Ninja, and King of Pull. I have also defeated Mormon Shaggy. Sadly, I have not really gained a sound victory on the Reformed Stoic. I have to sadly admit. I've had some good comebacks, and I am aspiring to surpass Reformed Stoic. But it is still a thing that is in the making. However, I have definitely shown inescapable reality and Reformed Stoic that I am no intellectual lightweight. At least I've done that. It was a necessary condition for the millennial reign. In his opinion, in Rick's opinion, 5th to 15th century. That is a very low and degrading time of human development. Like, at least outside of, with the exception of China and the Islamic world, there wasn't really a lot of intellectual and inventive stuff going on in that time period. That is like the bottom of the barrel of civilization. You could argue that the Bronze Age collapse was worse. You could perhaps argue that the Bronze Age collapse was a worser time period. But that's like... that time period that you're describing is pretty bottom of the barrel. The divine plan of salvation always wins. Rick Perry displays the Holy Cross. That is what the mercantile order would have you believe. I mean, it was very decent and peaceful. There's no doubt that the time of the feudal church was actually very stable and very peaceful. No competing philosophical schools of thought. There wasn't really any notion of free thinking or free thought. And it's just the doctrines of the church that are absolute. And then below that, the kind of peasant superstitions. The little superstitions and kind of very unintellectual, wild beliefs of the peasants and masses that were partially drawn out from the pagan leftovers, the leftovers from paganism that survived after the Christian conversion, that became the superstitions of the peasants, and kind of the wild, outrageous beliefs that they had, and kind of just the baronal fights and baronal feuds. I mean, I guess it was a peaceful age to live in, if you could manage to get around the feuding part of everything, the feuding barons and the wars of the barons, and the lords constantly warring each other, and the king having very little authority and very little say. But, yeah, I'm surprised that you haven't used Magna Carta and King Henry VIII's coronation oath has a way to utilize the papal primacy, like what Thomas More did when he was judged at the council, or judged by Parliament to be a heretic to the Anglican faith and put to death. Because Thomas More, you sound a lot like Thomas More, and you come off a lot like Sir Thomas More, Rick Perry. I'm surprised that you haven't used Magna Carta and the coronation oath of 1509, when Henry VIII became king. But he utilized the primacy of Peter a lot in his engagements. I watched clips from a movie, A Man for All Seasons. It's from 1966. And it's about Thomas More and the conversion of England from Roman Catholicism over to Anglicanism. Not really presciently pure Protestantism as such, but sort of an in-between. Not completely Catholic and not completely Protestant as such, but sort of a crossing in between of those gaps. Rick Perry says that he is not a big papist. I never made the claim that you were. I just said that you kind of act in your assertions a lot like Sir Thomas More. Thomas More was, of course, a major supporter of the pontificate. Back then, in his day, it would not have been called the papacy, it would have been called the Holy Pontificate. You could place yourself in any apostolic communion under the jurisdiction of any bishop. Wouldn't matter to me. Well, most of Western apostolic Christianity, with a very few irrelevant exceptions, the old Roman Catholics and the Sedevacantists, the anti-papists, and a very few extreme fringe groups. Jay Dyer calls them the trailer park popes. Just about all of Western apostolic Christianity is under the direction of the Pope. It is ultramontanist, and the exception is what Jay Dyer describes as the trailer park popes. Like the trailer park boys that think that they're popes. Or they're somehow now, because of some kind of weird sovereign citizen-like excuse, they're now the Pope. And they're now calling themselves the Pope, and they live in a trailer park. And they've invented all of these encyclicals and decrees. Can't run down those steps, I'll fall.
I've been trying to get a hold of that guy to shut the door. He won't answer that.
I had to go get the door. I had to go open the door right fast. Rick Perry says that he is not a big papist. Rick Perry says, I already read that, Pope equals Father equals Patriarch. It's the same thing. The Bishop of Rome is just another bishop. Well, I think that Vatican I defined the Pope as the Patriarch of the entire Church. Vatican I defined the Pope as the Supreme Pontiff. And he's basically like the virtual dictator and the overseer of the entire corporate organization. The entire corporal structure. You could say, But yeah, I think the Bible has flaws, and it has, some very unscientific mystical dogmas in it that do not add up to science. They don't add up to scientific realism, scientific materialism. If you want to talk about scientific materialism, the Bible is just basically materialism. It's just mysticism. Mystical dogmas, mystical notions, and mystical magical stuff. It doesn't make any sense from a scientific materialist point of view, scientific realistic point of view. And it's I don't give a shit about authority and hierarchy. I absolutely cannot stand hierarchy and organizations and traditions and bullshit like that. I don't need it. I don't need the liturgy, and I don't need the scriptures. I can live my life as best as I want. And I'm a free individual, and I can do as I please. I don't need these repetitious mystical dogmas to define who I am. I can define who I am by simply just being myself. being who I already am and saying as I already am. Rick Perry says that Vatican I was very recent, relatively speaking, 1869. So about the time of Italian unification, the Italian Risorgimento. Yeah. I think the reason you have trouble understanding how I think, too, is because you're from a more traditional country, like the UK. You're from, like, the United Kingdom, which, like, holds fast to its institutions and to its traditions. And I find it absolutely fascinating that America is more religious than Great Britain is. Because Great Britain is an older, more hierarchical and traditional society with institutions that go back to the Middle Ages, to at least the high medieval period. Whereas, like, America is only 200 years old, and the institutions here are just completely new and young, and, like, Americans are more likely to believe in God, and I don't really get that. It's very strange. Like, I don't think that is what Thomas Jefferson or Thomas Paine or any of these people, Benjamin Franklin, would have considered America to have become. In fact, 1776, only 17% of Americans went to church on Sunday. And I find that very fascinating that the year in which the United States broke away from the British Empire and formed its own nation was one of the years in which it was least religious. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, all of these doctrines were written down at a time period in which America was the least religious in all of its national history, the late 18th century. The late 18th to about the late 19th century was one of the least religious periods in the history of the United States, at least in the North. Because Abraham Lincoln said that religion was bullshit. Abraham Lincoln basically was saying that organized religion was nonsense. Like, I think that Abraham Lincoln had a point when he said that religious dogmas were bullshit and that organized religion was just a bunch of lies. And that was at the same time that the emancipation of the slaves happened. But yeah, that's interesting. After the Civil War, the United States became much more religious. At least in the North. The South was more religious, but it's very weird that in 1776, only 17% of Americans was religious. And that's when all of the foundations and stuff happened. So it's actually irreligious people that actually get things right, that actually get things done. Religious Christians like Rick Perry are pessimist, gay, and broken. Like, he said himself that, like, religious dogmatism makes people into slaves. Rick Perry is a moral slave. He is a slave of his own mind and his own lack of freedom. His lack of belief in freedom has turned him into a slave of the passions of his flesh. Let's see here. Pepperoni is good. I gotta say, pepperoni is good is a very capitalistic thing to call yourself, my friend. Has bro been yapping for 2 hours? You sound like Jay Danks or Beans, bro. Or Herb Green. Abraham Lincoln was pen pals with Karl Marx. That was actually the head of the Department of State. That was actually the person in charge of the Department of State. That was the one that replied to Karl Marx. Abraham Lincoln never responded to Karl Marx. That was the head of the Department of State. Let's see here. Abe Lincoln was right. Yes, he was. Abraham Lincoln was right. Like, I don't care about these rednecks. I don't care what these dumb, Christ-tard rednecks think. I live in fucking Texas, and I just about cannot stand them. I just about cannot fucking stand these Christ-tard redneck hicks. Country bumpkin pieces of uneducated garbage. Asinine, toothless, redneck pieces of shit. And I'm not afraid to say that. My fucking constitutional rights to say that, bro. And Abraham Lincoln was not a Marxist. He was funded by the railroad companies. He was funded by the railroads, the Rockefellers. I believe Abraham Lincoln was close friends with the Rockefellers, so he was not a Marxist. He put down business strikes as much as he put down the slave-owning secessionist states. Code of Truth says religion is the enemy of free-thinking men. Agreed. Agreed. Pepperoni is Good says he was 2 steps away from being a Marxist, and I agree. He was not. Rick Perry says, LOL. Pepperoni is Good says, and I frockin' quote him, labor is superior to capital. Depends on who controls the means of production. That entirely depends on who holds the reins of power. Whoever holds the reins of power and whoever influences and controls the institutions are the ones that have the greater power over the other. Code of Truth, religion is a mere tool to control the masses. Fear, ignorance, and superstition is what the elite rely on to control people. Religion is used to instill fear, ignorance, and superstition. Yes, it very much does. The United States became what it is as a result of being not religious at the time that the Constitution was drafted, at the time that slavery was emancipated, at the time that all these things were going on. America was less religious than it is now. Right now, America is a very Christian and very religious nation, a bit very Protestant, a bit more so Protestant than anything else, but also with a very strong Catholic center as well in the Northeast. But at least outside of the Northeast of the United States, America is very Protestant. And it's actually more religious now than it was during the American Revolution. Americans were very less religious and very more deistic during the American Revolution. I kind of wonder that maybe this is why we don't have as many freedoms. That's why there's like 10 million something people in prison right now with no rights. There's millions of people in prison right now, and they have no rights. Rick Perry says that's Enlightenment era Jacobin historical revisionism. Well, I'm a Girondin. I am a Girondin. Not a Jacobin, Rick Perry. I'm a Girondin. A Girondin, not a Jacobin. And it's not historical revisionism. Most of humanity's history was pagan and pre-Christian. Most of the world's cultures were not derived from Christianity, they were derived from paganism. In fact, the Europeans already had their ethnic identities before Christianity ever stepped foot on European soil. The Native Americans already had an identity, a place of sense of who they were before the Europeans arrived and brought Christianity with them to corrupt and destroy and genocide the Native Americans. May as well be a deist with that attitude, which today equates to atheism. Yeah, I'm not an atheist, Rick Perry. I can't speak for Code of Truth, but I'm not an atheist, but I definitely don't believe in church hierarchy and authorities. I don't think that those authorities are doing very good. Pepperoni is Good said that he came here from the Tuffles lied. No. Okay, Rick Perry said, I come here to be exposed as a glowy. I am just an innocent tranner in truth. Code of Truth says, America brought back the beautiful idea of a constitutional republic pioneered by the Romans. Rick Perry says, pagan institutions, Girondins, Jacobins, two wings of the same bird, the false dialectic of the liberal imperium. Well, dude, at the beginning of my stream, I quoted Alexander Dugin's critique of liberal modernism. So, I already did that. I'm not a liberal, I'm a postmodernist. I would define myself as a postmodernist Hegelian. I am a postmodernist, non-nihilistic Hegelian. And I would define my politics as Girondin, or Girondin. But I am an anarchist anyways. I don't believe in the legitimacy of the state. I don't give a shit about the existence of states and nations. It's nonsense and its dogmas. Religious institutions and state institutions and authorities are bullshit. The state of Texas is a complete notion of bullshit. The existence of the United States and its legitimacy is bullshit. Especially when they claim that their roots are Christian, when during the American Revolution only 17% of colonials went to church on a Sunday, one of the least religious times in American history, when the Declaration of Independence was issued. Look where we are now. Fallacy of a distinction without a difference. Deism is absolutely not atheism and does not equate to it. That is an actual defect in logic and rationale. Indeed, it is Code of Truth. Deism is more akin to agnosticism. Agnosticism is the denial of an absolute proof that there is or is not a God. Atheism is a belief that there is no God. According to American law, which is, I'm not the best expert on slavery, is legal under the context of legal punishment. Yes, according to the 14th Amendment, it is. Well, the 13th Amendment. If you read the 13th Amendment, it is, very much. But those emendations to the Constitution are bullshit. Southern Israelite, better known as Drake Alden Shelton, has already pointed out that the sovereign law, the law of the commons, is superior to the Fed's law. Well, I'm on the fence with religion, Rick Perry. I'm sitting on the fence with religion. Isn't it bizarre that, all of my enemies were Christians? The worst people that attacked me were Christians. The worst sort of people that have attacked me, that have tried to call me a pedophile and have said the most visceral things against me and question my integrity are all Christians, or all claim to be Christians. Isn't that not weird? And Southern Israelite Drake Alden Shelton has said himself that perennialist Christianity is the greatest delusion to have ever existed, completely built on the misconstrainings of empiricist rhetoricianal nonsense and Neoplatonism. Southern Israelite follows what the Gospels say. He believes in Christ as the Messiah, or Jesus as being the Messiah, akin to being sort of an angel of Yahweh as opposed to the literal Son of God. And yet he himself has said that Christianity is a fallacy. It is a fallacious doctrine that sexually deprives men. Christianity, as a religion, deprives men of their masculinity. It deprives men of their sexual urges, and it puts men in a state of submission and basically slavery. It is theocratic slavery. Catholicism and Orthodoxy are theocratic slavery. Let's see here. Drunken Surfer says, do you think only 17% attending church means only 17% were religious? Or is it more sense that only 17% had a physical church local to them to attend, but were still religious? There were already about 500 different denominations in the 18th century 13 colonies, Drunken Surfer. There was already 50 to 500 something denominations. And all of those Protestant English-speaking denominations, all of whom were run by English-speaking white people of British and English descent, they all had to fight and agree on some common grounds. There were Unitarianists, Anglicans, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Quakers, Amish, Anabaptists in the early United States. And then there was a large degree of non-believers and deists. Back then, they would have been called deists. Some of them would have called themselves transcendentalists. Some of the more standard Protestant denominations asserted that the Baptists were actually atheist, or asserted that Anabaptists were atheist. But yes, the American Revolution was one of the lowest ebbs of religious thought and religious belief and dogma in the United States. Pepperoni is good. Communism leads to anarchism, and anarchism leads to communism. Thoughts? I think that Noam Chomsky said it best, Pepperoni. Noam Chomsky has talked about it. Noam Chomsky says that Vladimir Lenin, betrayed Karl Marx, and Vladimir Lenin misquoted and misused what Marx had originally written, and misapplied it to political underpinnings of dangerous and powerful authoritarian revolutions, violent, oppressive revolutions, and authoritarian regimes that Lenin's notions created. But that's Noam Chomsky. That's what he says. Noam Chomsky believes that you can create anarchism before communism, and that it is the state that leads to class struggle and class oppression. Code of Truth says that Jesus Christ was a Volcel, literally the perfect God for incels. Well, if Jesus Christ was the literal Son of God, and he had both divinity and humanity, and was perfect, he wasn't an incel or a volcel. Volcels and incels are contiguous only to the imperfect, fallen in sin. Imagine being of European stock and believing in some Middle Eastern religion with Northwestern Europe had already well-developed, beautiful religions that worked fine. And you have a very good point there, Code of Truth. The Europeans were already quite well sophisticated. They already had iron technology, they had iron tools, and under the Romans they already had writing and all sorts of things as well. And this was all going on well before the conversion to Christianity. And it's like the 5th to 15th centuries were the Dark Ages. The 5th to 15th centuries were the Dark Ages of Europe. Very little in the way of innovation, invention, social, technological progress, all of that stuff. So I do agree with you, Code. In a way, Europe and America were subverted by the church. But also, in a way, the church used the Europeans for the glory of God. So I can see both sides. I can see both sides of how Europe benefited from Christianity and how Europe was also destroyed culturally and bankrupted culturally and socially by it at the same time. Let's see here. Rick Perry says, are you renouncing Jesus Christ was a Messiah for the Jews and they denied him? Yeah, I wondered why the Pharisees rejected Jesus. Or did Jesus reject the Pharisees? But that's when the Jews were beginning to embrace the Mishnah and the beginnings of the Talmud, and they were adding the doctrines of the Talmud from the Babylonian exile and all of that. Judaism after the Babylonian exile was very different from what it was before. Inescapable Reality is probably the guy that would know it better than me, and he knows a lot about this stuff, and you need to talk with him about it. Rick Perry says, are you renouncing Christ now, Code? No, he's not saying anything negative about Jesus Christ. He's just talking about how Christianity is not really a European religion, it's a Middle Eastern religion. That's all he's saying. The Pope was more tyrannical than the worst of the emperors. Rome was the world's most advanced nation, and Christianity subverted it from within and drew it into the Dark Ages. And that is actually, in a way, true. Like, the church created some of the worst forms of torture imaginable. The Inquisition had the worst tools of torture and the worst and most horrendous tools to torment people. Like, I mean, you couldn't even masturbate. According to Roman Catholic canon law, if you masturbate or have a self-orgasm, you're in a state of mortal sin. you have to confess every time you masturbate to a priest. You have to confess your sins to a priest, and you have to do all this nonsensical mumbo-jumbo, and if you die after you masturbate, if you die and your sins have not been forgiven by the priest, if you have not completed a certain extent of capitulation or capitulation and denigration, you'll go to hell. If you masturbate, you're in a state of mortal sin and you go to hell when you die. So like the church says that you can't masturbate. And meanwhile, you have these people like Rick Perry and Doria the Doll and Rena Law, and they get fucked in the ass with dicks all the time. And nobody talks about them. Nobody talks about their anal masturbation that they do, or oral masturbation. And as far as they're concerned, they're not in a state of mortal sin. It's just when you masturbate your penis that you're in a state of mortal sin, according to the Roman Catholic Church. It's madness. Absolute madness. Drunken Serpent says, Code of Truth is melting down. Rick Perry says, well, it seems to me you've always worshipped the Chad meme as a substitute Christ. No. Code, you have more of a political outlook than a religious one. I think he's just on the fence, Rick Perry. Pepperoni says, Jesus has two natures, the divine and the natural. Yeah, that's the Chalcedonian, creed that you're talking about. Pepperoni is truth. See, I'm going up too far. At least from a Christian POV. Code of Truth says, see how the two Christians, Rick and Surfer, cannot muster any rebuttal other than to claim I am melting down. I know what you mean, Code of Truth, and I'm with you. I'm sitting on the fence with you on this stuff. Their deductive, logical reasoning skills are bad. Especially Surfer, they just don't have very good deductive, logical reasoning skills. I'm going to have to plug my phone in. My battery is about to die, so I got to plug my phone in. Thankfully, I've got the cord right here. But yeah, I'm going to have to plug my phone in. It's about to die. I got 5% of the battery left. Okay. My phone was about to die and I had to plug it in. Let's see what we're doing here to do none of that stuff with the features. I just want to scroll up and see what was said here. Okay, so Code of Truth says, see how the two Christians, Rick and Surfer, cannot muster any rebuttal other than to claim I am melting down. Well, you're not melting down, Code of Truth. You're making perfectly sensible arguments. So I mean, just don't give in to it, man. You have to think above that. Don't give in to your feelings or emotions. Just stay above it, man. I merely state facts. Rick Perry says that Code's rap music is an Urzeit's liturgy. A wristful... No, I don't want to hide or time no one out. Stop doing that. a wistful lament, memorializing his lost masculinity that can only be exercised under this current system of things by worshiping the black man. Well, I think that black people are okay, bro. Black people make great music. And you know what? Black food is pretty chill. African American culture is pretty chill, man. There's bad people in every race. I know that blacks have a lower IQ, that's clear, but at the same time they're also more malnourished, they're more impoverished, and there is more of a discrepancy to describe them as hostile and stuff. I get that. Pepperoni is good. Not really. The point of Jesus is all sins have been paid for. Well, you need to tell that to the Jews because the Jews would disagree. Also, Roman Catholics that follow canon law and the Eastern Orthodox would disagree as well because they believe in works on salvation or a salvation based on works creed. As well, pepperoni. Sort of self-contradicts in different parts of the Bible, though. Yeah, I've already been covering and talking about this and showing Dan McClellan. Drunken Surfer says, "This is madness, Warhammer. Could you define what madness is?" Drunken Surfer, could you define what you mean by that? Could you define what you mean by madness? How could you make the bare bones assertion that my claims equate to madness? Richard Perry says, in truth, code, you're more of a homosexual than me. Well, that's kind of a wild statement to say, Rick Perry, but okay. That's kind of a wild statement to say, Rick Perry, but okay, bro. Whatever, man. You're not upsetting me. You could say that I'm more of a homosexual than you are, and I could care less. Interdimensional Lizard says, "Are you doubting Surfer's 100% mathematical efficiency? The burden of proof is on him to show. And Drunken Surfer, I don't think that your mathematical knowledge is good. I think that your mathematical knowledge is flawed, and when you apply it to the proper symmetry, I do think that 0.009 times infinity very well equates to 1. It can equate to 1 because that is the only thing it can equate to. Even though it goes on forever, has a 9, inevitably it will ultimately end up being a 1. A whole 1. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but I'm just saying. So yes, I do doubt his mathematical efficiency. Code of Truth says that Christianity will force you into a narrow-minded way of thinking and to think outside of the narrow blinders. The narrow blinders will be claimed to be madness, as Surfer has said. Yeah, I would agree with you, Code of Truth. The fact of the matter is that why would God care what's going on the earth? Why would God really give much of a shit about what happens on one small planet in the middle of a gigantic cosmos, potentially even a multiverse? And if there's only one God over the entire multiverse, what is he going to do with one planet? What is he going to do to care about what life does on one mere planet compared to trillions of other planets? But yeah, Christianity is a very narrow-minded thing. Islam is profoundly worse than Christianity. Rick Perry says that Rick Perry says, "What is this atheist hour?" Well, that's a good question, Rick Perry. I mean, what is your Instagram like? Like, what is your Instagram? Does your Instagram represent the well-intentions of a true theistic believer? Does your Instagram represent the good intentions of a true Christian believer, given all of the pornography that it has on there? Like, you sell your body, and then you call yourself a Christian. You sell your body and pornography, you sell yourself online, and then you say that you're a decent traditional Catholic. Isn't that not a contradiction? Isn't that not a fallacy of false equivalence? And then you claim that I am a bad person because of what I'm just saying. I'm just saying facts. Code of Truth says the Christian screeches as you think different from them. That is true. Rick Perry is just using one of his racist personalities. Rick Perry seems to have a very interesting hodgepodge of different split personalities, all right. Right now, I think he's kind of a bit on his more rational split personality self. There's only, when it comes to split personalities, Code of Truth, there's only one ego. There's several different personalities, but there's just one ego. And it doesn't matter which person his mindset is in, it's still one ego because it's still one mind. So all of those split personalities are still feeding on one concentric ego. Drunken Surfer says, "You're not melting down, Code of Truth. Don't give in to your feelings." Yeah, dude. Yeah, just, dude, don't worry about what they say, bro. Let them have their say. Like, let me tell you something, Code of Truth. If they were streaming right now, if Rick Perry or Drunken Surfer were streaming right now, do you think that they would let you or me have the right to our opinions or entitled opinions on their streams? No, they would not. They do not support the freedom of speech as we do. So we have that one strength over them at least. Let's see here. I don't know who's talking to who. Rick Perry says, 22-year relationship with a Bajan woman. I thought it was a Jamaican that you were going out with. Like a Jamaican. Disputes your accusation. Code of Truth says, no, Rick, you have had no such relationships. You've had no such relationships. Cool story, bro. I think Rick Perry has had a real relationship with two black women, West Indian black women. I think he is telling you the truth. Okay, Rick Perry says, well, Gel, and understand your incredulity. My good life must be very triggering to you. Code of Truth says, your life is miserable and I don't pity you. No, do not do that. Rick Perry says, bare assertion fallacy. Dude, this is like turning into Yogi Bear. Real Yogi Bear hours, bro. Alright, Drunken Surfer has said here, do you know what symmetry means, Warhammer? Symmetry is the way that you use advanced algebraic formulas to define geometric features. Calculus, symmetry is the outpouring and fixture and the summation of calculus. It is the end result of what you get when you break down arithmetic numbers into algebraic equations using advanced calculus into those summaries. Those summaries are what symmetry is. Symmetry defines the laws, or the supposed laws of the universe. Isaac Newton and what was that German guy? Well, there was a German mathematician at the turn of the 17th, 18th centuries. Him and Isaac Newton actually contributed to inventing advanced mathematical symmetry out of the Arabic sciences, or the Arabic Leibniz. So Isaac Newton and Leibniz were the ones that actually invented and advanced and developed symmetry. Symmetry is the full computational results that are drawn out of advanced calculus. Drunken Surfer. Yeah, I know that was a lot, but Pepperoni is Good says, multiverse is a theory, not a truth. Well, I mean, if you're going to go in that direction, you could say that everything is a theory. I mean, you know, like, I could say that this is a theory right here. You can't touch this, Pepperoni. You can't just reach out with your hand and touch this right now. Even though you see this in front of you, you can't smell it, you can't touch it, and you can't taste it. As far as you are aware of, Pepperoni, this right here could just as well be a theory. Because the only way you have ever seen this in existence is on this video or stream. And you could very well argue that this is a theory and not a reality. Even though, for all matters of fact, this healing ointment in my hand is real. And just because you can't touch it, you can't feel it, or taste it, or smell it, doesn't mean it's not real. Okay? Just because we don't know what is outside of the expanding cosmos doesn't mean that we know beyond the fact that there are no other universes. Stephen Hawking has argued that galaxies contain pathways to other universes or other time-spaces or convoluted time-spaces in different black holes. And it has been argued that black holes just contain denser universes or different denser peripheries. Well, that's Stephen Hawking that argues that. Okay, the phrase point 0.9 recurring is the appropriate way to express 0.999, slash verbally. Well, that's a catch-22 interdimensional lizard. You're just making a catch-22 argument. It still equates to 1, okay? 1 equates to 0.9 times infinity. 1/2 equates to 0.09 times infinity, okay? It's a negative decimal versus a positive whole 1. And there's no way to go more than a 9 and less than a 1 without doing a decimal, a fraction, or one of those, or a negative number. And therefore, it ultimately has to go to 1, to a whole and complete 1. Interdimensional lizard. Code of Truth says Christianity is a barbaric medieval religion that does not account for the likely infinite amount of planets that could support life. That is correct, Code of Truth. And there could very well be very primitive biomolecules on Europa and Titan. There could even possibly be simple prokaryote cells in the ocean and Europa has under the dense ice sheets in the underlayered ocean said. The idea that life can only exist on Earth is just laughable at best. In fact, Code of Truth, they found a rock in Antarctica. NASA found a rock in Antarctica that was originally a meteorite from Mars that had single-cell organisms on it that were millions of years old. It was a meteorite from Mars, and, I mean, it could have been contaminated after it landed in Antarctica, but it was from Mars originally. It had single life on it. Code of Truth said, I accidentally banned Pepperoni is Good. I unbanned him. Yeah, dude, I mean, if you start banning people, it causes the views to go down. The viewers will go down to like 1 or 2, and it will stop back up. Yeah, don't do that, Code of Truth. I mean, it's okay, you're man, but if you and link their comments and stuff, it makes it hard to communicate and to get arguments out. You know, just be careful doing that. The time that you want to start deleting messages and ban people is if they link pornography. If they link pornography, if they show people's addresses, they show people's doxes, they dox children, they talk about harming or hurting children or underage minors, if they talk about like stuff like that, I mean, that's, if they talk about killing or murdering someone, you know, that's when you want to do that, bro. But Rick Perry and Drunken Surfer and them are not doing that. Pepperoni and them are not doing that stuff. Like, you know, they're not pedophiles and they're not doxing people, so I would, you know, that's what those options are for. That's why they're there. They're for spam. They are for, and when I mean spam, I mean like 500 gigawatts of spam. I don't mean like somebody posting messages 5 times the same in a chat. I mean like 500 spam. That's what I mean by spam. Death threats, pedophilia, pornography, elicitation to pornography, intention to sell pornography, doxing. That's the kind of stuff that you want to ban people for, Code of Truth. You don't want to ban people because you don't like them or disagree with them. I'm just saying, you know. Ugh, my throat is starting to hurt. But yeah, would you not ban nobody, Code of Truth? It hurts the stream. It makes me look like I'm the one afraid of the truth or whatever. It makes me look bad when you start banning people and deleting stuff. It makes me look bad. Yeah, just don't ban nobody. Yeah, just don't ban nobody. I'll let you know when to ban someone. I'll let you know when it's appropriate to ban or delete a message. Right now, nothing inappropriate has happened. Okay, nothing bad has happened yet. So I'll be right back, okay? You don't want to ban people because you disagree with them. That's a bad look. Yeah, so, Code of Truth, don't ban nobody, okay? The time that you want to ban someone is if they're threatening to hurt a child, they want to dox a child, like Sam B. Sam B, okay, here's an example. Sam B is under the age of 18. Euros MC has doxed Sam B, who is under the age of 18. If Euros was in my chat doing that right now, posting a link, face doxing Sam B, I would ban Euros. Okay? But otherwise, like, if they're threatening a child, if they're showing child pornography or CP, if they're threatening to dox a child, those are the reasons to ban people then. Otherwise, you don't want to ban people because you disagree with their outlook. You know, it's not a good look to ban people. All it does is just, it takes away the viewers, it takes away the credibility of the streamer when they start doing that kind of stuff. So it's like, you know, it just makes you look bad when you ban people. It really does. The only time you want to do that is with pedophiles and underage minors, when there's improper content in the stream, and there's a person under the age of 18 watching it. You ban them and you ban the pedophiles. That's about the only time that you really ban people in the sector, is that. Otherwise, you know, it's like, you know, you ban people. I gave you the wrench to ban people for Soberman stuff. If they do Soberman shit, post Soberman stuff, that's when you ban people, right? But Rick Perry and Drunken Surfer, Interdimensional Lizard, Pepperoni are not doing that stuff. They're being very civil. We're being spoiled with sector goodness tonight. What a treat. Sam B won. He did. Euros MC was proven to be a pedophile, streaming troon pornography in front of underage minors. I am a Ving Rhames only Christian. We're civil gang. Yeah, just ban pedophiles and minors. Or people that are threatening to harm minors. Basically. Yes, I'm just negotiating with parameters with him. He's streaming right now. Surfer, are you going to interview with Shaggy? Oh, is Shaggy streaming? Is he watching this? Code of Truth having a band tantrum. Tee-hee. Keep coping, brah. Well, Sickening Rick has said many pedophilic things, yet I am yet to ban him. Well, he hasn't done that on this stream, Code of Truth. He hasn't done that, but he's just been superstitious. The only bad thing that I've seen them do so far is they have been superstitious. Shaggy doing a comedy stream at this moment. Well, I've got to go poop right fast. I'll start up another stream and I'll A-log Moron Shaglet. I apologize, but I got to do some stuff right fast.